So if you look at, Silicon Valley right now, billionaires are currently spending just hundreds of millions of dollars on biohacking.
Oh, absolutely.
Weird green sludge, hyperbaric chambers, red light therapy, all of it just hoping to squeeze out like one extra decade of life.
Yeah, we are entirely obsessed with adding time to our clocks.
Right. It's like we treat biological aging like a mechanical puzzle we can just engineer our way out of.
Mm-hmm.
But according to some ancient sacred texts, there's a yogi who lived in central India who supposedly beat modern science to the punch.
By about 1,000 years. Yeah.
Exactly. And he didn't just add, a decade to his life. According to the legend, he added 14 centuries.
Wow. Which is, a number that completely shatters our modern framework of human biology.
Yeah.
We're looking at the legend of Changdev Maharaj today. He was a towering figure in the Nath yogic lineage.
And this is in present-day Maharashtra, right?
That's right, near the confluence of the sacred Tapti and Purna rivers. And according to these traditional texts, he supposedly lived for 1,400 years.
Just incredible.
And not only that, but overcoming death 42 separate times.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because on its face, to a modern listener, 1,400 years just sounds like pure fantasy.
Sure.
It sounds like folklore. But diving into the sources, it becomes clear that this isn't just a biological claim about a guy who ate really well and avoided stress.
Right.
The texts are using this immense lifespan to communicate a much deeper spiritual mechanism at work.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture of Hindu philosophy, time or kala isn't just about counting birthdays.
Or watching the seasons change.
Exactly. It's viewed as a fundamental, almost physical force. It is the ultimate consumer of life. It's the force that binds every living being to the relentless cycle of, birth, decay, and death. So within these sacred traditions, surviving for 1,400 years, it symbolizes a total victory over biological entropy. He didn't just endure time, he theoretically stepped outside of its jurisdiction entirely.
And the sources point to a very specific yogic achievement to explain how he did this, right?
They do, yes.
They call it Bhuta Siddhi. And my understanding is that this isn't just like basic meditation.
Yeah.
It's supposedly gaining literal administrative access over the 5 great elements. So earth, water, fire, air, and ether.
Yes, the building blocks.
But how does mastering those elements mathematically translate to not aging? Like, how does that work?
Well, think about what the human physical form is actually made of. In this philosophical framework, the body is entirely constructed from those exact 5 elements.
Right.
They are the building blocks of reality.
Yeah.
So ordinarily, our consciousness is at the mercy of those elements breaking down over time, entropy.
Yeah.
But attaining Bhuta Siddhi means a yogi's consciousness is elevated to a level where it actively commands the building blocks of their own physical form.
So essentially, instead of trying to patch up a leaking boat,
Which is what we do.
right, which is what modern medicine and biohacking attempt to do, Bhuta Siddhi is like gaining control over the water itself, so it simply refuses to enter the boat in the first place.
That is a perfect analogy.
The elements stop decaying because the yogi is commanding them not to.
Exactly. To his devotees, attaining this state meant his body was no longer subject to the usual rules of physical decay.
That's wild.
And his physical description in the ancient traditions perfectly reflects this, this profound, almost terrifying level of elemental mastery.
Right, because if you master the earth, you probably start looking a bit like it.
Oh, for sure.
The texts describe him as this towering ancient figure. He had flowing white hair, a massive long beard, and his entire body was perpetually covered in sacred ash.
Just coated in it.
Yeah, and he also wore thick strands of rudraksha beads, those heavily textured dried seeds you often see Shiva devotees wearing for prayer. You just picture this imposing figure who looks less like a human and more like a mountain that just decided to stand up and walk.
Yeah, and that imposing elemental image is really crucial when we transition to how he is most famously depicted in traditional paintings and, temple sculptures.
Because the legends go far beyond him just sitting quietly in a forest for 14 centuries.
They really do. The iconography is unforgettable.
It is. When you see a historical depiction of Changdev Maharaj, he is almost always riding a wild living tiger.
Just casually riding a tiger.
Yeah. And if that wasn't intense enough, he is holding a venomous king cobra in his hand, and he's using the snake as a whip to drive the tiger forward.
It's an incredibly striking visual. And it's meant to convey absolute authority.
I have to pause here, though, because this specific imagery seems to contradict the whole concept of a deeply enlightened, meditating saint.
How so?
Honestly, riding a tiger while whipping it with a cobra sounds incredibly violent.
Yeah, I hear you.
It sounds like he's dominating these creatures by force, just trying to show everyone how tough and terrifying he is.
It absolutely sounds like an aggressive display of dominance to our modern ears. But what's fascinating here is that the sources are adamant that these symbols were never meant to glorify violence or brute force.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the meaning is entirely symbolic and deeply spiritual.
Okay, so what is the actual mechanism at play? Why a tiger and a cobra?
Well, in this spiritual tradition, the tiger represents absolute fearlessness and untamed primal nature.
Okay.
And the serpent, the cobra, is a classic symbol for Kundalini.
Oh, the energy.
Right. It's the dormant, highly potent spiritual energy situated at the base of the spine in yogic thought, and it's heavily associated with Lord Shiva. So the fact that he is riding the tiger and holding the snake isn't about him beating them into submission.
It's about harmony.
Exactly. It represents a state of complete, fearless harmony.
Ah, I see. So the animals aren't terrified of him. Rather, they recognize his mastery over the very elements they're made of.
Precise.
The devotional literature mentions that wild creatures just naturally obeyed his presence, and that poison literally lost its terror around him.
Yes.
He was so in tune with the universe that these untamed, lethal forces of nature just became his willing companions.
Exactly. He wasn't conquering them from the outside. He was harmonizing with them from the inside.
Wow.
And according to the texts, that harmony allowed him to manipulate the external world in just astonishing ways.
Miracles.
Yes. The sources detail incredible miracles, controlling storms, calming raging rivers, commanding the weather through pure yogic concentration. There are even devotional accounts claiming he restored life to the dead.
Now, obviously, raising the dead belongs firmly to the realm of sacred legend rather than, hard historical documentation.
Of course, yeah.
But it proves just how profoundly he was revered. His followers didn't see these acts as magic tricks. They saw them as proof that divine consciousness could completely rewrite ordinary physical laws.
Absolutely.
And there is one miracle regarding light that I found particularly fascinating in the reading.
Ah, the manifestation of the Jyotirlinga.
Yes. So typically, devotees worship Lord Shiva using a carved stone lingam as a physical focal point, right?
Correct.
But the legend says that through pure, intense meditation, Changdev bypassed the physical stone entirely. He manifested a radiant Jyotirlinga.
A pillar of light.
Yeah, a pillar made of pure blinding light, just conjuring the divine presence directly out of the ether.
He essentially pulled raw spiritual energy into the visible spectrum. It's really the ultimate demonstration of his mastery over the elements.
But hearing about all this, the elemental mastery, the tiger riding, the pillars of light, it brings up a massive psychological problem.
Which is?
If I could literally conjure a pillar of pure light out of thin air and calm a storm just by thinking about it, how in the world do I not develop a colossal ego? How does a person wield that kind of reality-bending power for centuries and remain grounded?
This raises an important question, and it actually brings us to the absolute core tension of his entire legend, because the reality is he didn't remain grounded.
He didn't.
He didn't stay humble.
So the centuries of adulation finally got to him.
They did. In these spiritual traditions, acquiring incredible supernatural powers, which are known as siddhis,
right,
it's actually viewed as a massive spiritual trap.
Oh, really? A trap?
Yeah, because spiritual power without true, unattached wisdom inevitably breeds pride. You spend centuries performing miracles, nature bows to you, generations of humans literally worship you.
Yeah.
It becomes almost impossible not to develop a monolithic ego.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the climax of his story. Because after all this time, a new figure enters the picture. Changdev hears about someone who is capturing the attention of the region, a boy named Dnyaneshwar.
And Dnyaneshwar is only 16 years old. 16. Yet he is already becoming renowned across the region for his astonishing, unparalleled spiritual wisdom. People are calling him fully enlightened.
Wow.
So imagine Changdev, this 1,400-year-old master, totally accustomed to absolute reverence, suddenly hearing that a teenager is being hailed as the ultimate spiritual authority.
The sources suggest he was deeply curious, but his pride was definitely provoked.
Oh, definitely.
He decides he needs to test this young prodigy to figure out where he stands. So Changdev sends Dnyaneshwar a letter.
But the contents of that letter are what make this encounter so legendary.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He doesn't send a theological debate. He doesn't send a scroll listing his 14 centuries of magical accomplishments.
No.
He sends a completely blank page.
A completely blank piece of paper. The sheer audacity of it is just brilliant.
It's a brilliant, intimidating use of silence. When you think about it, how does a 1,400-year-old elemental master even begin to formulate words for a 16-year-old?
He doesn't.
Right. He sends nothing. It's like saying, I am so far beyond you, there is no language we share. It's like the ultimate passive-aggressive text message.
Or leaving someone on read.
Yes. Just a profound power play.
And the beauty of this moment lies in how Dnyaneshwar receives that silence.
Mm-hmm.
A lesser person, someone driven by their own ego, might have taken offense. They might have sent back a fiery letter defending their own knowledge. But the teenage saint understands the silent challenge immediately, and he responds from a place of absolute enlightenment. He writes back with 65 profound verses.
Verses that are still revered today as the Changdev Maharaj, right?
Yes. It remains one of the most treasured philosophical texts in the Marathi tradition. And the core subject of those 65 verses is Advaita.
Okay, let's break down Advaita because it's the key to this whole interaction.
Sure.
My understanding is that Advaita is the philosophy of non-dualism. It's the profound realization that all existence is one single continuous reality.
Yes, exactly.
There is no fundamental separation between me and you, between the ancient yogi and the teenage saint, or between the creator and the creation.
That is precisely it. And by writing entirely about oneness, Dnyaneshwar completely disarms the premise of the blank letter.
Oh, I see.
Changdev sent that blank page to establish a hierarchy, right? A rivalry based on who is greater. But Dnyaneshwar's response essentially says, a rivalry requires two different people. But at the deepest level of reality, we are the exact same consciousness.
He responded to a massive display of ego with a profound display of unity.
Yes.
It's an incredible philosophical checkmate. But reading the sources, Changdev doesn't just read the poem and instantly attain enlightenment, does he?
No. Centuries of entrenched pride don't dissolve that easily.
Yeah.
Dnyaneshwar's intellectual response just wasn't enough for him.
Right.
Changdev felt his authority was still being questioned, so he decided to escalate the situation from a silent exchange of letters to a literal physical spectacle.
And when a 1,400-year-old yogi escalates, it is cinematic.
It really is.
According to the text, Changdev mounts his living tiger, grabs his venomous Cobra whip, and gathers thousands of his disciples.
Thousands.
And they march toward Dnyaneshwar's village in this massive, terrifying, earth-shaking procession. He wants to physically overwhelm the young saint with the sheer magnitude of his power.
It is a very deliberate show of force, but the contrast of what they find when they arrive at the village is what elevates this from a mythological battle into a really profound philosophical lesson.
Right, because Dnyaneshwar isn't sitting on a golden throne or meditating in a grand fortress.
No.
He is sitting outside with his siblings on a simple, crumbling, lifeless stone wall.
Just ordinary, inanimate masonry.
So this ancient, terrifying yogi rolls up on a tiger with an army.
Yeah.
The expected, respectful protocol would be for the teenager to stand up, bow down, and greet this famous elder.
Of course.
But Dnyaneshwar doesn't stand up. Instead, he gently touches the stone wall he's sitting on, and the wall rises into the air.
It just lifts off the ground and floats forward.
A flying piece of architecture carrying a teenager intercepting a tiger-riding wizard.
It's amazing.
It's an incredible visual, but we need to linger on the deeper meaning here. Because earlier, we talked about Changdev's mastery over elements and animals. Commanding a living tiger requires asserting dominance over a separate mind.
Yes.
That is duality. That is willpower. But flying a wall, what does that represent in the context of Advaita?
This is the exact realization that breaks Changdev's ego. Dominating a living creature requires force. It requires the exertion of will over another being.
Right.
But Dnyaneshwar didn't exert force. He awakened consciousness within lifeless stone. By making inanimate matter respond to him, Dnyaneshwar proved an infinitely higher level of universal connection.
Oh, wow.
He showed that he didn't just command nature from the outside. He was so deeply merged with the divine source that even dead stone recognized his essence and responded as if it were a part of his own body.
Wow. So willpower versus pure connection. Changdev is sitting on his tiger, looking at this flying wall, and the realization just hits him.
It does.
All of his miracles, all his centuries of mastering the physical elements were entirely based on force and ego.
The sources describe a moment of absolute silence from the crowd. And in that silence, Changdev realizes that his 1,400 years of achievements are fundamentally incomplete compared to the pure, unattached wisdom of this 16-year-old boy.
Which brings us to the actual climax of the story. The ultimate miracle isn't the flying wall or the tiger. The ultimate miracle is what Changdev does next.
He climbs down from the tiger. He lays the venomous serpent gently on the ground. And this ancient master, accustomed to being worshipped by thousands, walks forward and bows completely, touching his head to the feet of the teenage saint.
So what does this all mean? It's the total surrender of the ego.
It is the moment his true spiritual liberation begins. The destruction of his massive pride was a far greater miracle than conjuring light or commanding storms. And there is a final, fascinating twist to this surrender.
Right, because after all of this, Dnyaneshwar doesn't even accept him as a student.
You would expect Dnyaneshwar to welcome him and say, "I am your guru now."
Yeah.
But instead, Dnyaneshwar directs this legendary ancient yogi to his even younger sister. Her name was Muktabai. She was also recognized as an enlightened saint, and Dnyaneshwar tells Changdev that she will be his true spiritual guide.
The ultimate humbling. He goes from being the most intimidating figure in the land to bowing before a teenager who then assigns him to learn from his younger sister. And the amazing part is, Changdev accepts it.
He embraces it with profound humility, and that marks the beginning of a totally new chapter for him. He moves past the need to perform miracles, he stops displaying his mastery over nature, and under Muktabai's guidance, he finally focuses entirely on inner liberation.
And his legacy today is a testament to that entire sprawling journey. There are temples dedicated to Changdev Maharaj across Maharashtra. There is a village named after him right there on the banks of the Tapti River where pilgrims still gather. When you see his image today, the ancient yogi on the tiger holding the cobra, it isn't just a picture of a beastmaster. It serves as this timeless, multi-layered reminder of his story.
It reminds us that power, no matter how vast or supernatural, remains incomplete without wisdom. The highest victory Changdev achieved in his 1,400 years wasn't conquering death, and it wasn't mastering the 5 elements. His greatest victory was the conquest of his own ego.
Which brings us right back to where we started today. In our modern world, we are constantly striving for more power, more productivity, more lifespan, more technology to conquer our environment and bend nature to our will.
Always more.
But if the figure who allegedly lived 14 centuries, mastered the building blocks of reality, and rode a wild tiger, ultimately realized that giving up control and embracing utter humility was his greatest achievement, what does that say about what we should really be optimizing for today?
It fundamentally reframes what it means to be truly powerful.
Something to mull over the next time you're checking your smartwatch to see if you got enough deep sleep to extend your lifespan. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the legend of Changdev Maharaj. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.